The monarchy did not tremble because of a public scandal, a leaked photograph, or a careless remark. It trembled because King Charles made one private decision that changed the emotional balance inside the royal family. Camilla came with a request she believed her position entitled her to make. But Charles refused her, turned away from the Queen Consort, and personally escorted Princess Anne into the succession vault. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not dress the refusal in soft palace language. He simply looked at Camilla and said her request cannot be honored today. And those 5 words carried more force than any public decree. The succession vault, a protected chamber holding private royal inheritance records, sealed family instructions, succession memoranda, and custodial documents, was not merely a room of papers. It was where the monarchy kept the quiet evidence of who could be trusted with its future. Camilla understood that instantly. She had not been denied by a clerk, an aide, or some distant rule buried in protocol. She had been denied by the man whose reign she had stood beside, and that made the wound personal. Camilla tried to hold her composure, but the silence around her became impossible to ignore. Charles remained still, his hand resting near a sealed folder marked for family custody, a phrase that meant the documents were tied to internal royal guardianship rather than ordinary palace administration. A senior courtier saw that folder and knew this visit was not ceremonial. The king had come prepared. Anne saw it too, and though she said little, she understood the danger of being chosen in that moment. Her calm did not mean comfort. Her restraint did not mean ease. Being escorted past Camilla placed Anne at the center of a fracture that could not be hidden behind smiles, titles, or polished statements. Charles then made the decision visible. He stepped toward the inner door and allowed Anne to follow, while Camilla remained behind with the full weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. The Queen Consort realized this was not only about access, it was about trust. The king had not simply protected documents, he had drawn a line between influence and custody, between position and confidence, between marriage and monarchy. Anne crossed that line because Charles believed she would guard what others might try to shape. Camilla watched, stunned and wounded, as the door opened for someone else. But before the palace could understand why Charles chose Anne, everyone had to confront what Camilla, Anne, and the king each stood to lose. Behind the locked door stood more than files, records, and royal language. Behind it stood years of loyalty, rivalry, sacrifice, and resentment. Charles was not simply deciding who could enter a guarded room, he was deciding whose judgment he trusted when the future of the monarchy felt fragile. For Camilla, the refusal cut like a public demotion. For Anne, the invitation felt like a burden disguised as honor. Charles carried the pain in silence, because this was not only a royal decision, it was a personal wound. The king knew Camilla had stood beside him through storms, judgment, and years of public doubt. She believed that loyalty should have earned her a place near every serious decision touching the crown. Royal continuity, the planned passing of duties, records and responsibilities from one reign to the next, mattered because it shaped how the family would survive beyond Charles himself. Camilla wanted influence over that future. She did not call it control, she called it understanding. But Charles heard something else beneath the request, and it made him colder than she expected. Camilla felt the old fear return, the fear of being close to the throne, yet still kept outside its deepest trust. She had gained the title, the rooms, the place beside the monarch, but one locked door made all of that feel fragile. Anne accepted the escort without celebration, yet she sensed Camilla watching her with wounded disbelief. The Princess Royal, a title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, understood the burden instantly. This was not a victory over the Queen Consort, it was a test. Anne knew that being trusted by Charles could make her appear powerful, but it could also make her the target of every quiet resentment that followed. William received the news through a private call from a senior aide, and the prince did not react with shock. He exhaled with quiet relief, as if Charles had finally done what the future required. William understood that succession decisions could not be shaped by emotion alone, because one weak choice could echo into the next reign. Sophie heard soon after from a palace aide in a documented internal account, and the trusted confidant immediately sensed the danger. She knew Charles had not just opened a vault. He had drawn a line through the family, and everyone would soon be forced to stand on one side of it. Camilla finally asked the question no one wanted to answer. Her voice was low, but the hurt inside it was unmistakable. Why her? Charles did not respond quickly. Anne did not look away. William's quiet relief and Sophie's concern now hung over the whole palace like a warning. And the answer to that question was buried not in the vault itself, but in a private incident that had pushed Charles past the point of patience. The refusal did not begin on the morning Camilla reached for the vault. It began weeks earlier, during a private succession briefing after the Windsor continuity ceremony, when one sentence changed the temperature in the room. Camilla had asked whether certain future family records could be reviewed before Anne was consulted. Charles heard it. Anne heard it. And from that moment, the palace began counting down to confrontation. Anne did not react loudly, and that made the moment more dangerous. The Windsor continuity ceremony, a private royal event used to discuss how duties, records, and family responsibilities would pass safely into the next stage of the monarchy, had already carried enough pressure. The briefing after it was supposed to be calm. It involved future custodial responsibilities, meaning who would guard sensitive family materials, symbolic inheritance arrangements, meaning objects and roles tied to royal memory, and private instructions connected to royal continuity. But Camilla's question cut through all of that. She did not ask to be informed after Anne. She asked whether the records could be reviewed before the Princess Royal was consulted. Charles felt the meaning before anyone explained it. To him, Camilla's words were not simple curiosity. They sounded like an attempt to step between the king and the sister who had served without complaint, without drama, and without demanding reward. Anne heard the same thing, though she kept her face still. The Princess Royal understood the hidden insult. Her judgment was being treated like something to manage, delay, or filter. Camilla watched both of them, perhaps realizing too late that the room had changed. She had wanted influence over the future. Instead, she had exposed how far she was willing to reach. Charles acted quietly after the briefing ended. In a documented palace account prepared for private family custody, the king asked for the vault access logs, and what he found hardened his decision. Camilla's office had already requested preliminary summaries of succession-related materials. Not full files, not direct entry, but enough to show interest before permission had been granted. Charles read the record twice, then wrote a short notation across the file. No further access without sovereign review. Sovereign review meant the monarch's personal approval, not a routine palace sign-off, and that made the warning absolute. Camilla never saw that note at first, but its shadow followed her. Anne sensed Charles had withdrawn into decision. The king said little, yet his silence became colder with every passing day. By the time Camilla finally stood before him and asked for access herself, Charles was no longer weighing the answer. The hidden fuse had already burned down. That decision stayed silent until Camilla stood before him and forced the confrontation the palace had been dreading. Camilla did not arrive as someone begging for permission. She arrived as a queen who believed the answer had already been earned. Charles listened without interrupting, his hand resting near the sealed folder that had followed him from his private desk. Then Camilla said she needed access to the succession vault. The room tightened. Charles looked at her, lowered his voice, and refused. Camilla stared at him, as if she had misheard the one person she thought would never deny her face to face. The Queen Consort, the wife of the reigning king, had framed her request as simple preparation for future ceremonial planning. Ceremonial planning meant deciding who stands where, who receives what role, and how the family appears during major royal moments. She argued that her place beside Charles made it necessary. She said she needed to understand the monarchy's continuing structure, the planned order of duties and responsibilities that would shape the next chapter. But Charles did not accept that explanation. The king told her the vault was not a ceremonial archive. It was a protected family chamber tied to sovereign trust, meaning trust held personally by the monarch and not handed out because of status. Camilla's shock hardened into wounded anger. She asked whether this was truly his decision or whether Anne had turned him against her. Charles looked pained, but he did not retreat. He told Camilla that Anne had not requested access, had not pressed him, and had not whispered against her. Then he said the words that cut deepest. He had chosen Anne himself. The Queen Consort fell silent because there was no softer meaning hidden inside that answer. Charles was not blaming palace rules. He was not hiding behind advisors. He was saying, clearly and personally, that his sister carried a level of confidence Camilla did not. Charles struggled in the quiet that followed, because refusing Camilla meant hurting the woman beside him, yet allowing her inside would betray the duty he believed he owed the crown. The crown, the symbol of royal authority and national continuity, mattered here because these files shaped more than private pride. They shaped who would guard the family's memory, who could influence future records, and who would stand closest to decisions after his reign. Camilla felt that meaning land heavily between them. The refusal was not about one key, it was about one boundary. Charles then made the refusal impossible to reverse. He called for Anne himself. When the Princess Royal entered, calm but alert, Camilla saw the private argument become a royal act. Anne did not smile. She understood the cost. Charles lifted the sealed folder, and the room changed forever. And once Anne crossed that threshold, the real question was no longer why Camilla was refused, but what power Charles had just placed in his sister's hands. Princess Anne did not step forward like a victor. She stepped forward like someone who understood the cost of being trusted. Charles did not give her a speech. He gave her the sealed folder and a responsibility that needed no decoration. In that moment, Anne became the keeper of something Camilla had wanted to see, and something Charles believed only Anne could protect. Anne held the folder carefully, not because it was heavy, but because everything inside it could change the balance of the family. The succession vault held private succession instructions, meaning guidance about how royal duties and family authority would pass forward, along with sealed family correspondence, historical custodial records, and sensitive memoranda about future royal representation. These were not ordinary palace papers. They shaped memory, influence, and the official understanding of who had served the crown with steadiness. Charles knew that. The king also knew his authority as sovereign, the person holding final royal power, allowed him to decide who could review restricted family materials and under what conditions. Anne felt no triumph as her name became part of that decision. The Princess Royal understood she was being placed between Charles and Camilla, not as a weapon, but as a shield. That made the honor painful. Camilla had wanted access because access meant closeness to the future. Anne received access because Charles believed she would not bend the future toward herself. The difference was brutal. The Queen Consort could feel it, even without seeing the folder's contents. She had not merely been kept outside a room. She had been kept outside the circle of final confidence. Charles seemed older as he watched Anne open the folder. His choice protected the monarchy, yet it wounded his marriage in a way no palace statement could soften. The sealed folder contained a new custody directive, a formal instruction limiting access to succession materials to the sovereign, the heir, and one appointed family custodian. A custody directive meant a written order naming who could guard and review protected family records. Anne's name appeared clearly as that custodian. Camilla's name did not appear at all. That absence said more than any accusation. It told everyone that position beside the throne did not automatically mean power over the throne's private future. Anne read the line once, then looked at Charles with quiet understanding. She knew this would not stay hidden for long. Charles knew it too. Camilla's exclusion had rearranged the palace hierarchy before a single public word had been spoken. The king had trusted his sister, wounded his wife, and changed the path of every conversation still to come. But no locked door can contain a decision this powerful for long. And by sunset, the consequences had already begun to move through the palace. The palace did not erupt all at once. It changed in small, chilling ways. Aides stopped mid-sentence. Phones were answered in lower voices. A meeting was postponed without explanation. Camilla returned to her rooms with the kind of silence that frightened even those used to royal restraint. Charles had refused her. Anne had entered the vault, and everyone understood that nothing inside the family would feel ordinary again. Camilla closed the door behind her and stood still for a moment, as if movement would make the humiliation real. The Queen Consort removed her gloves slowly, one finger at a time, while anger gave way to something worse, the feeling of being replaced in a room she believed her title should have opened. Palace offices were already adjusting access procedures, meaning the rules for who could see restricted materials and who could not. Briefing routes were being changed too, which meant sensitive family documents would now travel through different hands before reaching senior royals. That mattered, because information inside the monarchy was never just information. It was power, memory, and influence over what came next. William heard the news through a direct message from a senior aide, and the prince felt relief before concern caught up with him. Anne's custodial role had been activated, which meant her authority was now formal, not symbolic. A custodial role meant she had been trusted to guard protected family records, not simply advise from the outside. William understood why Charles had done it. The future king also understood the cost. His father had protected the line of succession, but he had also forced a private wound into palace life. Camilla would not forget. Anne would not be untouched. Charles would have to carry both consequences. Sophie noticed the shift before most people dared name it. In a documented internal account shared among senior household staff, the trusted confidant heard courtiers stop saying consultation and start saying custody. That one word changed everything. Consultation meant asking for advice. Custody meant control over protected material. Sophie understood that Anne had not simply been included, she had been given weight. Then came the next shock. A scheduled joint appearance involving Charles and Camilla was quietly revised, and Anne was added to the internal planning list without explanation. Charles knew the palace had already begun reacting to a decision he had hoped to contain. Camilla sat alone with her hurt. William measured the future with careful concern. Sophie watched the language change around her. Anne remained steady, but even her steadiness could not soften what had happened. The king had made his sister part of the monarchy's inner defense, and now he owed her the truth. And behind closed doors, without aides, titles, or palace language to protect them, Charles finally told Anne why he had chosen her. When Charles and Anne were finally alone, the monarchy disappeared for a few minutes. There was no courtier to soften the words, no official phrasing to hide the pain, no ceremonial distance between them. Charles stood not only as king, but as a brother who had run out of people he could trust completely. Anne did not comfort him quickly. She made him say the truth aloud. Charles looked at Anne and admitted what he had refused to say in front of Camilla. The vault decision had not been made to punish the Queen Consort. It had been made to stop succession materials from becoming weapons in private influence battles. Succession materials meant the records, instructions, and family papers that shape how royal duties and authority pass forward. Charles knew those papers mattered because they could define reputations long after voices in the room were gone. Anne knew it too, and she did not let him hide behind duty alone. She told the king that secrecy might protect a file, but it could not restore trust unless the rules were clear. Anne's words struck harder, because she offered no easy comfort. The Princess Royal reminded Charles that the crown, the symbol of royal authority and continuity, could not survive if every private wound became a struggle for control. Charles confessed that he had feared hurting Camilla, but feared more what would happen if the wrong hands shaped the family's future record. The Queen Consort had wanted closeness to the process. The king had seen danger in that closeness. He did not call her disloyal. He called the risk too great. That distinction mattered, but it did not make the wound smaller. Anne answered with the calm that had made Charles choose her in the first place. She said she would accept the custodial role only if it served the crown, not revenge. A custodial role meant guarding protected family records with authority, not using them for personal power. Anne made that boundary clear, because she refused to become a weapon against Camilla. Charles listened, and for the first time since the vault door opened, the decision began to feel less like a fracture and more like a structure. Charles then revealed, in a recorded private family conversation preserved for internal custody, that William had not demanded Anne's appointment. The prince had quietly supported any structure that kept succession decisions above personal pressure. Anne absorbed that carefully, then asked the question that decided everything. Did Camilla know the decision was final? Charles did not explain. He did not soften it. He answered with one devastating word: yes. That finality prepared the palace for the outside world, because by morning the story was no longer contained within royal walls. And when the public finally saw the shape of what had happened, one image turned a private royal fracture into a national reckoning. By morning, the palace silence had become a national event. Britain woke not to a formal speech, but to a single front page that said more than any statement could. The headline stretched across the paper in black letters: Charles chooses Anne, Camilla locked out of succession vault. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered quietly, not cheering, not shouting, simply staring, as history seemed to change behind closed gates. Camilla read the front page in private, and the words struck harder than the refusal itself. The Queen Consort had endured judgment before, but this was different, because the humiliation now had a headline. Palace officials issued a controlled statement confirming that restricted succession materials were now under sovereign and appointed family custody. Sovereign custody meant the monarch personally controlled who could access protected royal records. Appointed family custody meant one trusted royal had been formally chosen to guard them. The statement never attacked Camilla by name. It did not need to. Anne's protected role was clear, and the absence of the Queen Consort was even clearer. Anne watched the public reaction with unease, not pride. The Princess Royal knew she had become a symbol of discipline at Camilla's expense, and that troubled her because she had not asked to be placed above anyone. The crowds outside Buckingham Palace held newspapers toward the gates, as if the paper itself had become proof of a new royal order. Buckingham Palace, the main working center of the monarchy, mattered because every silence there felt official. Every closed gate felt like a message. The vault was no longer just a protected chamber. It had become a national symbol of trust and exclusion. Charles heard the broadcaster's words before he saw the second wave of headlines. In a recorded morning media briefing, one presenter called it the most personal decision of Charles's reign, and the phrase spread quickly because it captured what the palace statement avoided. The king had not only chosen a custodian, he had refused his wife. He had trusted his sister. He had allowed the country to see that the crown could still cut into the heart of family life. Camilla felt exposed. Anne felt burdened. Charles felt the full force of a private decision turning into public judgment. William understood the danger of that judgment, but he also understood why it had landed so powerfully. The future king knew the country was not simply debating access to papers. It was asking who could be trusted near the monarchy's future. As the country chose its interpretation, Charles had to face the final meaning of what he had done. But the true verdict would not be written by newspapers, crowds, or palace statements. It would be written in what the family understood after the shock had passed. In the end, the locked door did not merely keep Camilla out. It revealed what Charles believed the monarchy needed to survive. Not charm, not influence, not private persuasion behind polished walls. It needed trust strong enough to withstand family pain. By refusing Camilla and escorting Anne into the succession vault himself, Charles delivered the harshest message of his reign. Love could stand beside the crown, but it could not overrule it. Charles understood the cost of that message, and he carried it without triumph. The king had chosen constitutional discipline, meaning the rules and duties that keep royal power above personal pressure, over the softer pull of marriage. He had chosen family trust over private persuasion. Camilla was wounded, but she was not reduced to simple defeat. The Queen Consort understood, in the quiet after the storm, that his refusal was final because the monarchy came first. She had wanted access because access felt like recognition. Charles had denied it, because recognition could not be allowed to shape the future record of the crown. Anne became the emotional center of what remained. The Princess Royal did not treat her custodial role like a prize. Custodial role meant the duty to guard protected family records, not use them for personal power. Anne closed the custody file with calm finality, accepting that her place was not to dominate the family, but to protect what had to outlast them all. Her loyalty had always been quiet, but now that quiet loyalty carried enormous force. Camilla had asked to be included. Anne had been trusted without asking. That difference became the heart of the whole decision. William privately acknowledged, in a recorded family conversation kept within the internal custody account, that Charles had steadied the future by placing succession matters beyond private rivalry. The prince knew the choice had hurt Camilla, and he knew it had aged his father in a way no public statement could hide. But William also knew the alternative would have been worse. If succession materials became tools of influence, the next reign could begin under a shadow. Charles had stopped that before it could happen, even if stopping it broke something close to him. The monarchy emerged bruised but clearer. Camilla had been refused, but not erased. Anne had been trusted, but not crowned with victory. Charles had protected the crown, but not without sadness. That was the final verdict. The king's refusal became remembered as the moment he proved duty could still defeat comfort, and the palace understood the truth completely. Camilla had been refused, Anne had been trusted, and Charles had made the kind of decision only a king could make, when the future demanded more than affection. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.